Welcome to the Post-Pandemic Freedom Show brought to you by Bold Molders. I'm Dr. Wayne Buchanan here with my good friend.
Joshua Shaffron. Howdy.
And today we're continuing the conversation about the success seesaw.
Yep.
I know that we've had, why don't you go ahead and give us that rundown on how we got here. I know I'm going to interrupt you at some point here to test my own understanding because
Okay. So we'll go over to the
yeah,
results. Just as way of a review to make sure that we all understand what's going on here, we know that we're entering the mastery zone from both the yin side and the yang side so that we avoid the zero factor. And we talked about the tools and resources in previous episodes about how to enter it as a bold molder from the outer game, the what to do, the action plan journey side of the equation over here. And we're continuing with the tool of the results seesaw, the success seesaw, as the inner game tool to be able to help us enter the mastery zone and avoid the collector syndrome or playing as a collector as we stay inside of the inner game and we master that and we tweak that up so that we can get the best results and not fall into the 0 times 1 million is still equals 0 results so that we can get the maximum results for our bang for our buck. So today we're going to be talking about the results seesaw or teeter totter, depending on what part of the world you're from. You might call it something different. I grew up calling it a seesaw. So thus the name results seesaw or success seesaw. And basically what we have here is the
where I want to quiz myself.
this
So,
is where you want to quiz yourself. Okay.
yeah, we've got the fulcrum, and that's what we talked about already. The bar across it is what it is. We'll get there. But yeah, so I know we talked about tune, look, see, and that phrase rattles off my tongue because you say it so often. But the idea being that we want to tune our awareness and really focus in on something, then it turns into looking for evidence. Boo, I had to look to get that one. And then you get to see, and I already had it. So I find myself cheating, but I
I
really
can
want to
cheat.
recall
I
it.
can I can
Yeah,
avoid your cheat
it's
by
done.
switching
I already
scenes.
saw it all. But so we tune our thoughts is how you labeled it there, or where our focus is. Then we look for the evidence that supports that, and then we see the results, as
And we're doing
opposed
this all the
to
time, right?
the backwards version is that doesn't work, that we kind of try and default to, is we say, good, this is the result I want. What do I have to do? And oh, by the way, I'm not the focused on the right things. If you're really lucky, you then can run the other direction. But most of the time, we don't even we try and build that pyramid from the top down, and it doesn't work, does it?
Right, right. So that's a good review, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't have anything to add to that because now
So
what we're
let's,
going to do is we're going
yeah,
to
walk
put
us through that bar.
the cap on it, and now what we're doing is we're going back and forth, right? And so
Okay.
what this basically means is that every subject, every situation in our life is really two different situations or two subjects. The what we want to have happen on one side and what we don't want to have happen on the other side. And
And by
often,
subject, you mean what we've tuned into, right?
yes, a thought, a
Okay.
subject, what we're, I mean, let's keep it concrete in terms of goals, a particular
Okay.
goal or a particular thing that we want to see manifest. That's why I've since adjusted it from success seesaw to result seesaw. What are the results that we want to see in our experience? So if we look up
Okay.
here at the C part, that's what we want to see certain results. And on this side, what ends up happening when the seesaw touches down over here is we see the results that the unwanted results on the situation. So if we call this, pick a goal so that we can make this concrete. Give me something that could be the subject matter that is the seesaw on top of the fulcrum. Anything.
Um, Goal is, and I'm now doing well-formed outcomes in my head. Uh, let's start with lose weight and turn it into actually being able to do the IKFF trainer certification test. So kettlebell
All right.
particular kettlebell
Forget all
workout
that
that I can
that spin. Let's just lose weight.
do.
All right. So let's say that the subject is lose weight. On one side of the seesaw, when it touches down on this side, what ends up materializing is we lose the weight that we want to lose. So let's say we wanted to lose 20 pounds. When it actually touches down over here, we've successfully lost that 20 pounds. When it touches down over here, we didn't lose any. It was the unwanted result. So in other words, we probably gained weight. We feel more bad about ourselves. We're binging, and we're whatever, whatever our patterns are. When it touches down on this side, it's the absence of it, or the unwanted results is that we either stayed the same or we even gained weight. So that's what I mean when I say every subject is two subjects, or every situation is two situations. That which we want, the idealized outcome that we're looking to achieve, and the exact opposite, or the what we fear will happen and that won't end up materializing, won't end up manifesting as a result of our efforts. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we look at my beautiful drawing sides, on one side we've got the wanted, and on the other side we've got the unwanted results. That's what I mean by every result, or every subject is two subjects. There's the wanted and then the unwanted. So if we just go back to this seesaw right here, what we have is that all of this seesaw tips based upon what we believe, what we're thinking about, what our ideas are. So everything starts as a passing thought, and a passing thought becomes a habitual thought, and a habitual thought becomes a belief, and a belief becomes a core belief, and a core belief becomes a rock solid expectation or conviction that it is going to happen, whatever. But the thing to remember is that what we believe to be true, what we believe is an absolute, what we know as a core belief or as a rock solid expectation, started out as a passing thought right here. And the reason why I have the numbers going out this way and out this way, becoming heavier and heavier, is because as they become more, as a passing thought becomes a habitual thought, it's a little heavier. And so it has a little bit more leverage and it tips it down. Now, it can notice that the same process can happen on either side of the seesaw, whether it's this side or this side. A passing thought about the unwanted result can become a habitual result. In other words, well, I haven't been able to, if we're using the lose weight example and we're on this side of the seesaw, if a passing thought is, well, what if it doesn't work? I've tried these things before. And then if I think that passing thought often enough, then it becomes a habitual thought. Well, it's just one more thing that I've stacked up. Now this becomes a belief. Well, I guess I just can't lose weight. A core belief is like, it's just, I'm big boned. I'm just this is just my lot in life. It's what it is. And then this over here. Now, the problem is that when it touches down and we start to feel the health repercussions and we start to feel the tug of war inside of us, and it's rock solid over here, it doesn't stop us from wanting more. In fact, this side, the unwanted, in fact, then launches that, as Abraham likes to say, launches the rocket of desire for the wanted result. So, in fact, it makes us more aware that we don't have the result, even though we may be resigned, even though our belief systems, our core beliefs might say, I just can't lose weight no matter what I try, or this and whatever, but it doesn't stop us from wanting this over here, right?
It might even motivate us to do stuff, wouldn't it?
Oh, good point. It might just motivate us to then try things. And so now we try the latest fad diet or whatever. And so then we might get a result for a little bit and it starts teetering back and forth. But the point to remember in all of this is that passing thoughts become habitual thoughts. You think a passing thought often enough, again and again and again, it becomes a habitual thought. A habitual thought again and again and again and again as a habit becomes a belief. A core belief reinforced again and again and again becomes a a core belief, and then a belief becomes a core belief, becomes an expectation, etc. And the point is that once it becomes a core belief, or even just a belief, depending on how solid, we stop questioning it. We stop even evaluating whether it's true or not. And yet, how it got to be formed as a belief, all a belief is a thought that we thought again and again and again until we reinforced it enough to believe that it's true. And then the truth of it, whether it's true in terms of the indivisible, all of everything truth or not, the truth of it became true because it was a self-fulfilling prophecy based upon what we believed in that whole journey there.
Which sounds like once it gets far enough along, then we've tuned into something that we don't really want, but is now unconsciously there, and we look for those evidence and see the result.
Exactly. So it's been unconsciously there. But the good news is that once we see this journey and we recognize these patterns that are going on, now we can unwind it, and we can acknowledge that whatever's happening, anytime I see an unwanted result on this side.
I love this model, this analogy, metaphor, whatever we're calling it, because all the belief management side of things, the tools from the NLP side of things, now this has a really clear application. I mean, I've always talked about belief breaking and building. Like, we want to reinforce the beliefs that are helpful for us, and let's undermine the ones that are not so helpful and debilitating and unresourceful and la la la. But being able to put it on the seesaw just gives a really good visual for, okay, this is how this actually impacts your life. It's not just changing beliefs. It's, oh, we're actually stacking the deck in our favor rather than against us.
Right. So on this side, we've got the wanted result, and on this side, we've got the unwanted result. You can also call it being unstuck or being stuck, right? Just in this metaphor. Here it is tipped down on this side, and then when it crosses the results threshold, i.e. the ground, the unwanted result manifests in our life. And then when it touches down on this side right here, the results threshold on this side, what we see in our experience is the wanted result. So the tune look see, what we see is what we wanted to have happen, the outcome that we were expecting.
Does it have to actually touch down to see that wanted or unwanted?
Well, you definitely get clues along the lines, and that's what's next, right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it doesn't actually materialize fully until it does cross the results threshold of touching ground. So let's say to lose the 20 pounds, it has to touch ground. But it doesn't say that when it's here, we haven't lost 10 pounds. So we're making progress. We can see that we're definitely moving in the right direction, but it hasn't touched ground yet, so we haven't officially lost the exact weight that we want to see. And likewise, on this one, until it touches ground on this side, we haven't manifested the failure evidence. We're not a failure until now. As it starts to get there, we start to get worried and it starts slipping away. And usually what ends up happening, that's why the snapback loop happens, is like, uh-oh, it's slipping away from us. It's not coming out the way I want. And it usually goes very fast the other way. Whereas, unfortunately, on the other side, it doesn't move as fast sometimes to touching ground. But let's just say that there's nothing impeding it, that it's a free-flowing seesaw, that it can be this way, that it can be this way, that it can be this. The idea is just to get the concept of when it touches ground on either side, that's what happens, right?
Makes sense.
Now, there's clues along the way, and the clues are emotional in nature. In other words, there's what I would call abundance-based emotions on this side of the seesaw, and fear-based emotions on this side of the seesaw. And they get more intense as you get closer to the ground, to the results threshold, and they get less intense as it gets more neutralized up top here, right? Same thing on both sides, the emotional scale or the intensity thereof. So it's less intense emotions. Well, let's just go right here, and then I've superimposed it so that you can get the feel of it, right? So there's less intense. Let me just make sure that it's all lined up so that you're seeing what I'm seeing. So let's say that there's less intense, it's completely neutral, so to speak, right here. In other words, that there's not any intensity or on the emotions, like whatever happens, happens. I really don't care one way or the other. I don't have any attachments. I don't have any emotional
Mhm.
feelings about it. And as it starts to tip into more of the fear based emotions, now what we wind up with is it becomes more and more intense on the fear based emotions as we go down here. So
Mhm.
here it's not so intense, here it's more intense, and then we get into the red zone. And if these perfectly lined up, you'd see that it's more intense. So before it actually touches down, and you were asking, like, do we have clues? Well, we do have clues as to what's happening based upon how we're feeling. So the fear-based emotions get more intense as the seesaw tips further down. It doesn't have to touch ground, but now it gets more intense, and now we start to run the unconscious conditioned programs that we have in us, like, well, see, I'm just this way, or I can't win for
Mhm.
losing, or if we are following the weight example, well, maybe it's a thyroid problem, or maybe it's a maybe I need to go on, start smoking again because I could lose weight when I was smoking, or whatever, like these are all the
Yeah.
crazy stories that we tell ourselves that are part of our belief systems that are completely unconscious, that have been conditioned in by our past. And so as they
I
get
want to
more
tip it the other
intense,
way.
huh? Yeah. So,
I want to tip it the other way. Thank
well,
you.
and it works the same way. So when we have more abundance based experiences, more abundance based emotional feelings, as they get more intense, then it becomes like, oh, like it's like it can't not happen. Like it's not a question of if it's going to touch down, but when. And again, keep in mind that this is just free form. Like there's nothing else impeding it. We've got no stories weighting us down right now, just in the story. Like when it touches down, as it goes through there, we get more and more momentum that helps us to touch down on either side. Right, more and more intensity
Mhm.
is going to help us weight down the seesaw, and that's why the numbers go from 1 to 5 and 1 to 5 on this side, because as we feel the emotional intensity, those things have more leverage on us to be able to tip the seesaw back and forth. And I guess I need to
Mm.
um, do like this so that you can see me on the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I was catching now the intensity in each of those 1 through 5 stations. Right? You can have that intensity in a passing thought, but it's near the fulcrum and it doesn't have much push.
Doesn't have the
Whereas if you
leverage.
have some intensity out there at the far end in these things that we say, no, this is really how it is,
Right.
it's got all sorts of leverage and it does its thing real easy and everything moves fast.
And that's why a belief has more leverage than a habitual thought and more
Hmm.
power. And if the belief that you have conditioned into yourself, or the core belief that you've conditioned into yourself, happens to be on the abundance based side, towards on whatever the subject is, towards losing weight, like I can do this no problem, well,
Hmm.
then it's going to go in your favor, and it's going to be relatively easy to tip. Losing the weight is going to be simple, and it's not going to be hard. And on the other hand, if it's a core belief or an expectation that you can't lose weight, that then it's going to be really hard to overcome that, because you've got it rooted down on that side of the seesaw. So what you end up with is you've got this tension that is pulling between the unwanted informs the wanted. So when you have the unwanted results on this side, when it touches down over here, or even dips into the fear based emotions, well, then that informs the wanted results on this side. So that it's a nice tension if it's used positively, when you don't know what you want until you know what you don't want, right? But if you use the unwanted side of the seesaw to say, oh, well, what is it that I really want? What is it that I want to create in my life? Okay, great. However, Here's the problem, and this is what we'll be getting into in a future episode, is that there might be that mean sixth grader sitting on the seesaw weighting it down, that I call Fred stories, that you have to then overcome on a particular subject to force it
Mm.
down, to create that results that you want to do. So it's not necessarily the free form seesaw. There's some stuff going on that we're completely unaware of that's part of our unconscious conditioning.
And a lot of us, I know, when we start getting into those negative emotions, say, all right, we just need to pump up the motivation. Let's go do more. Let's do it stronger. Let's, harder, better, faster, stronger, right? That sort of vibe. We're just going to go be more intense.
Right. Right, and that's what leads into the motivation side of the equation, where we're trying to force it, where we're operating out of fear. Remember the fear-based emotions versus the abundance-based emotions. We're operating
Mm-hmm.
out of fear, so that causes force, and we're now scattering desperation. We're forcing it down on this side, and what we're unaware of is that we've got this stack of stuff that we're overcoming that's invisible to us, that's completely unconscious, that we literally have to fight against, because every time we go on one of those fad diets and yo-yos back and snaps back down here on this side, and we don't get the results that we want, we stack up another story, another unconscious conditioned behavior pattern now gets stacked on top here. And what does that do? Well, that forces it down to this side of the equation. It forces the other side of the seesaw, where we're now got to work even harder. We got to put more weight on this side, more force, more energy to push it down on the other side, to overcome all of that unconscious conditioned patterns of behavior that now have stacked up, that we don't any longer see as being even an issue, but it's there, it's running us.
I'm still struggling with this idea of motivation being on the fear-based side. Like, that's what makes that side touch down.
Yeah, makes it, forces it, got to be hard. And that's why the next episode that we're going to really do a deep dive into is motivation sucks. And it's because
Okay.
I think we need to re-engineer what we believe motivation will do for us. And because, look, I don't think you like the idea of that tic tac, that back and forth, that all that work, all that energy, where you're working really hard, you're burning yourself out. Or would you like to actually get the results, enjoy the results, not burn yourself out, and then go for the next vision, the next piece, the next goal, the next accomplishment, without having the snapback loop, without living in that snapback loop? Will there be tic-tacking? Yes. That's the difference between using that force of motivation versus inspiration, and living on this side of the equation over here and using all of these things. And that's where we'll kind of wrap up the seesaw conversation, and as a tool, showing exactly what's going on with the boss Fred pile and how that works within motivation sucks. And I think that you're going to want to tune into that next episode, because it's really going to re-engineer the way that you look at motivation and what you use instead to replace motivation, so that you can get lasting results, that you enjoy the journey, and it's a mountain that you're going to be happy climbing. And yes, you can get to the top, but it's also a mountain that every step you take is not drudgery. It's enjoyment, and it's an inspired action. And it'll allow you to answer your higher calling and make the impact that you know that you're meant to make, and play the game that you know that you're supposed to be playing, as opposed to playing that smaller game where, yes, you may be checking off everything on the list and you may be accomplishing great things, but you still feel like a fraud in all of the things, and it's never big enough, it's never enough, and you're not truly pursuing the things that are meaningful to you, and that you know that you can make your mark with in the world. And not only that you can make your mark with, that you're supposed to make your mark with, that not answering that call is devastating. It's like selling out on yourself. And you know this whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And that's really what's weighing heavy on your heart and your soul.
Well, that abundance-based side sounds spectacular. And before we do the motivation sucks and Fred pile all of those shenanigans, what can people do today to apply this idea of the seesaw?
Well, look at it, pick a subject, not 10 or 20 or 100. Pick a subject that you are tipped down on one side or the other. And actually, pick a subject that you're tipped more down towards the unwanted result side, and pick a subject that you're tipped more down to or touching down on the wanted side of the success seesaw. And notice the intensity of the emotion for each. And notice that as it's more intense, like the more intense on the abundance side of the seesaw, well, it's just a matter of time. Like, there's no question of if it's going to touch down, if I'm going to get the result, but when. And it's just around the corner. It feels like it's just around the corner. And so it's exciting, it's empowering. And whether or not you've actually fully achieved it yet, you know that you're on your way. You can feel it, you know it, and nobody can tell you otherwise, and nobody can enter in any kind of self-doubt, can enter in from anybody else's validation, because you've got that validation from yourself and you know that. Just tune into that emotionally. Where is that and what do you call it? Because whatever I call it doesn't matter. Whatever the labels are that I put on it doesn't matter. You can tune into what it means to you, and only you get to say where that is. And likewise, tune in on the other side, because if you don't like what you're feeling, if you don't like what you're feeling about a particular situation, you can be guaranteed that you're on the way. It's on the way. If it hasn't yet manifested totally as to what the disaster is that you don't want to have happen in your life, if it hasn't touched down that side yet, well, then you can be sure that it's on the way. And as it becomes more and more intense, then more and more you're closer and closer to what you don't want to have happen, what you're hoping won't happen. But the key here is don't judge yourself and don't judge the situation. Just notice what it is and what the emotional intensity is, so that you can verify and validate what I'm talking to you about as the tool goes on, so that you can get a handle of it. Because once you get this and once you see it in your own life and you apply it specifically to your life and situation, all you'll need to do is visualize the seesaw, and then you'll be, oh, like, which side is it on? And boom, and then boom, oh, well, so I'm more in, what's going on is that it's just dipping more into the unwanted side. All right, cool, then what is it that I want? And then we have to have some tools on how to help you get rid of the boss Fred pile. And now I'm getting several episodes ahead, but we're going to get there, don't worry. And then it's just a matter of practicing it. But as soon as you can just visualize it, one side or the other, I think you'll find between the WMN compass for the what's working, what's missing, what's next, for the action journey as a bold molder, then you have the seesaw as to be able to visualize immediately, boom, as the inner journey side, as the playing as a bold molder on the inner journey side. Now you've got the tools to tune, look, see, and unwind it on a regular basis, that you can then reinforce it and choose what you're tuning into and what you're reinforcing, so that you can choose to both unwind the unwanted. You've got unwanted expectations. Well, you can unwind it the same way that you can wind up the other side. So you don't have to ignore the fives on the other side of the seesaw. You can turn the fives into fours, into threes, into twos, and into ones at the same time that now you're turning ones into twos, into threes, into fours, into fives on the other side of the seesaw. And now you've got both sides working for you, so that it's no longer working against you. And it's going to be working against you based upon whatever your unconscious conditioning is, until you make the unconscious conscious. It'll direct your life, and you'll call it fate. So it's directing that seesaw because it is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I recommend.
And it feels like WMN compass, success seesaw, and the R&Ding that's hidden in that post-pandemic abundance playbook that I know you're going to talk about now, because you always do.
Yeah, well, go over to postpandemicabundance.com, and you can be right there. You'll be able to download Wayne's special report that's called the Post Pandemic Abundance Playbook. And that is the guide for you to be able to play along at home and, more importantly, customize this specifically. The general knowledge that we're talking about here, now you can customize it to your specific situation and personalize it to exactly what's going on in your life. And by the way, the brilliance about this playbook that Wayne wrote is that it applies to all of these episodes. So each time you go through it, you can print out a new copy of it because there's worksheets included in it, and play along at home, so to speak. And more importantly than just playing along at home to learn, you're playing along at home to be able to apply it to your specific situation so that you get to see results that are necessary and adapted to your specific needs and situation, rather than trying to play within our game. You're taking our tools and resources and playing within your own.
I'm just thrilled that it came together as well as it did, and it's
Me
such a
too.
resource. I mean, it was one of those, hey, will you write this thing? Sure. And had no idea what was going to
Yeah,
come out
until
of
we
it.
got into
So,
some of these episodes, I had no idea how universal it was going to be anyway. But oddly enough, it's the great playbook to play by all of these episodes and achieve your version of post pandemic freedom and
all right,
abundance.
I'm going to pat myself on the back twice,
Yep.
and then we'll move on, and we will pick up in our next episode
Yeah.
where motivation sucks. I still feels wrong, but we'll do the thing. Until then.
And on that note,